Great to be here today. Thank you so much for the introduction. I've been following this for a long time, back when it was still SETI, and it was financial capability and then financial literacy, but I really like financial empowerment, despite the Oprah overtones. I think that really describes what you're trying to do. You're not trying to teach people information, you're trying to give them the power to change their own lives. And Ray's talk was really inspiring, and I loved all the references to books, and I'll look at them all, especially this new one coming out. So we have a panel today from 3 different sectors who will be talking about the challenges that they face in trying to help low-income families and what their priorities are and what they see as the needs to move forward and how they will go about doing it. I will introduce them, and then each of them will get a few minutes to talk about what they are doing, and I'll ask them a few questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So let's start with Jennifer, and where are you trying to move your sector along, and what are the priorities and the challenges?
Hi, it's really nice to be here at another ABLE Learning Conference. It's always really great to reconnect with so many people who are involved in the field, and also to meet the new people who come in to the conferences every year. So yes, I'm going to say a few things a bit as a pointy-headed researcher who's really into studies and data and numbers and things like that, and then maybe also a few words just as a bit of an observer and student of public policy and sometimes commenter on that. So I've got 3 things I want to say. Part of an overarching message to you is I think there's a lot that we're doing in this field that is really good and that we need to keep doing. And then another message is that I think we can do more and we can do better and we can demand better. So let me start off with point 1 on research. I think we heard it from Minister Matthews earlier today. This field really is exemplary in terms of its use of research and evidence-based decision-making. I see this, in part as an academic who is joined in this room by, I see David over there, hello, and other folks in the room. There is just such tremendous knowledge and really cutting-edge research that's being done in terms of understanding financial capability, wealth inequality, access to financial services. And research at the field level as well. I really think it's so important to highlight the fact that there are organizations in this room who are developing and generating knowledge and are integrating that into the way that they make decisions about how they run their programs. And finally, I also just want to acknowledge organizations even in the private sector. I've just completed a project with Van City Credit Union. Sorry, are they here? Van City? Anyone? Okay, I'll find you later. Anyway, so, and it's a really interesting project to be able to figure out a quick way to get a measurement on people's financial capability and actually give people a score, give them a quick bit of feedback on that. So I really think there's a lot that's happening that forums like this are so exciting to bring that all together. The next point I want to say is that notwithstanding all of the great work that we're doing to track trends, to understand what works on the ground, I don't think that there's any doubt in our minds that systems and our social architecture matter. They matter a lot. The way that our financial institutions sector is set up, the way that it is regulated, that matters. The way that we design and deliver our taxation and benefit system, quite often, no matter how great the local program is, right? Those levers, they're so good at the local level, but these big macro level forces, these big institutions, they matter a lot too. And so this brings me to the point about policy matters. And if you're going to permit me, because we're just in the wake of a federal election, I'm going to do a bit of a sort of a quick look back and a quick look forward. The old government that we had for close on 8 to 10 years actually got a number of things right, I would say. They did a lot of work to expand the role of the FCAC, to expand attention to financial literacy. They put in place the WITB, the RDSP, and these are programs that are important for building the financial stability, the financial security of low-income Canadians. And they also started some work to develop a better financial consumer code. So we see some attention on all of those various aspects of financial empowerment. So new government is coming in, is transitioning in right now. And I think there are a lot of signs for hopefulness in terms of the agenda that they've set. And I guess my challenge to this room is pay attention to the kinds of things that they've promised to do and hold them to them, okay? hold this new government to their commitments. So Minister Matthews already talked about the impact of the new integrated Canada Child Benefit in terms of lifting, by best estimates, about 300,000 kids in Canada will no longer be living in poverty. That's huge change. They've also made commitments in terms of improving RESP take-up. I think there are some folks in this room from Omega Foundation, for example, who know firsthand the amount of work that really is going to take. They've also promised things like a more proactive role for the Canada Revenue Agency. The role that the Canada Revenue Agency can play in terms of actually proactively linking people to the benefits that they are entitled to is potentially enormous. And they've, promised a new relationship with Aboriginal communities, who are among some of the most disadvantaged groups in our country. And last but not least, I also want to highlight the fact they've promised to roll back TFSA contribution room. So I just said a minute ago that the TFSA was actually a good thing that was brought in by the previous government. It was one of the first times that we had created an instrument that didn't penalize low-income savers by the time they got to retirement, right? And we didn't put restrictions on how you used the money, and we tried to make it as flexible as possible. So in terms of thinking about ways to give people an opportunity for those short and medium-term savings, this is not a bad vehicle. But there's no reason that it needs to have, $10,000 a year of annual room, right? So actually, this is the first time in the history of Canadian registered savings, like since 1957, that we're ever actually seeing some kind of rationalization for these limits, so that we're actually thinking about public policy in terms of what's reasonable, rather than constantly looking for escalators so that people who are already very well off or fairly comfortable can become more so. I think we have some remarks at the end to talk about sort of the next to-dos, so maybe I will leave it there. Thanks.
Yeah, and pass it on.
All right. Is this on? Yes. All right. So I want to start with the story of Rosa, who is a 54-year-old patient of mine. I've known her for about 7 or 8 years. She's been diagnosed with diabetes, with heart disease, with early-stage renal failure, with depression. She's someone that I've done all the things I'm supposed to do. I've prescribed. She has a list of 12 medications, as she should have. She's been referred to all the specialists. She's had access to all the right tests. But her health keeps getting worse, right? I mean, her kind of health and quality of life curves just keep heading down. And the reasons for that are pretty obvious to me, right? I mean, she's someone who is struggling to live on about $1,100 or $1,200 a month. She lives in substandard housing. She has almost no social supports, right? So her disease is not a traditional medical disease. Her disease is a social disease. Right, and so it's these kind of stories that push me into caring about things like financial empowerment. The other piece that makes me care about it is, of course, that incredible body of evidence that links poverty with poor health outcomes. I'm sure many of you in this room are very familiar with this. Probably the strongest epidemiological link that we have: higher rates of chronic disease, acute illness, accidents, and trauma, et cetera, et cetera. And again, this is probably no big surprise to you, but these are the two big drivers for me and hopefully for other health providers to get into this work. Now, the question that might be on your mind, which is maybe the one that's maybe a little less obvious, although hopefully not, is why should you care about the health provider sector getting involved in financial empowerment work? And so I'm going to suggest a couple of reasons for that. One of them is first of all, we see almost everybody, right? So almost every person in Canada, and especially people who live with social vulnerability, end up in contact with the health care sector at some point. So there's an incredible ability to access people, and especially people living in vulnerable situations. And second of all, and related to that, we have privileged access to the most intimate details of people's lives, right? So people come into my office, they will tell me things that they may not tell anybody else. And so this gives us an incredibly deep and well-rounded picture of people's social situations, which I think is really important when it comes to trying to work on improving people's social situations. And the third reason I think you should care is when it comes to advocacy. I still think that health providers have a trusted and respected voice in Canada when it comes to advocacy, and even when it comes to advocacy on social issues outside the traditional health world. I think we have that trusted voice, both because we're still seen for some reason as caring professions, which I think we are. And also because we do still ground ourselves in evidence. And I think there's still some trust that builds from that. So hopefully that's a bit of an argument that maybe sways you a little bit. I want to shift a little bit to some of the pieces of what we've done, what we started to do into this realm when it comes to dealing with social issues like poverty, financial empowerment in the health provider world. So one thing we've worked on is actually shifting what a frontline clinical health provider encounter looks like. We've done this through things like creating a clinical tool on poverty, which creates which offers a simple approach to addressing a social issue like poverty in the context of a traditional 10 to 15 minute frontline primary care appointment. So we've pushed this out hard. We've educated thousands of health providers on this. Hopefully we've had some impact in terms of convincing the health provider world to do something about this. And the kinds of things that they're pushing their patients to do are the stuff we've already talked about today: filing tax returns, accessing children's benefits, seniors' benefits, etc. And obviously we hope to push that envelope as we go. We've kind of pushed that a little further by actually creating new health team positions specifically focused on income security. So on my team at St. Mike's here in Toronto, we now have 2 full-time income security health promoters. So these are people whose entire job it is to work on the income security of our patients and of the communities that we work in, right? So pretty novel stuff, and we're just kind of testing this and trying it out, but hopefully starting to push the envelope there. And the third area that I want to point to is more in the advocacy realm. So we've seen increasing involvement of health providers in frontline advocacy for big level policy change. I mean, I've personally been involved in campaigns to raise social assistance rates, which I still think is worthwhile, despite what Mr. Matthews said, to raise the minimum wage. Thank you. We can have that conversation later if you want. To raise the minimum wage, to work towards helping people access decent work and improved employment conditions, and also working towards things like at least a trial of big level policy change like a basic income guarantee. So we'll see, and I think there's more potential there. And in my last minute, I just want to turn to a couple of sort of new areas we're forging into, and again, we can go into this more in the discussion. One has been new partnerships, and actually partnerships with financial literacy organizations like Prosper Canada, where we've been working to develop a frontline income benefits screening tool for use by primary care providers in their offices. Very exciting stuff. I'll be talking about it tomorrow at I think it's called the Learning Exchange, the Knowledge Exchange. Second of all, pushing more and more partnerships with advocacy organizations, right? Everything from the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty, the Workers' Action Centre, Voices from the Streets, so frontline working with organizations that work with people with lived experience or represent their stories. So this, I think, is really important for advancing this work. And the final opportunity, I think, is maybe the biggest in my world, which is actually continuing to work to mobilize health provider voices on this. I think we've raised awareness amongst several thousand. There are hundreds of thousands of health providers out there, almost all of whom do care about this because of the fact that they hear what their patients are telling them every day. So we've pushed this with big health provider organizations. The Canadian Medical Association has been amazing, the Canadian College of Family Physicians, Ontario College of Family Physicians, amongst others. We continue to find new ways to push this into their consciousnesses. And I hope that more and more health providers will be willing to enter into partnerships with you to think about innovative ways to bring this work into the front lines of the health sector. So I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to start by acknowledging the really beautiful welcome that Amy Desjardins provided at the beginning of this session. And it reminded me of a really important contribution that the community sector has to provide to this field. Our work at Seed Winnipeg is informed by the Community Economic Development Principles, which were formulated by workers at Nietzsche Foods, which is an Aboriginal worker cooperative in Winnipeg. And that approach, those CED principles and values have been adopted across Manitoba and in other jurisdictions in Canada, and are probably very similar to the values that underpin the work of community agencies that are represented here. And what they pose is a challenge to us to look beyond a view of our economy that's highly individualistic, that looks at people achieving individually for themselves and their family, a world in which you have winners and losers, and where you have people that are often left at the margins. And it reminds us of the importance of both building individual resilience, but also building stronger communities, stronger neighborhoods, as Gary pointed out, how important that is in terms of providing a foundation for people to move forward. So I think that frame to our work and the way in which it informs both the way that we approach our work, as well as how we inform research and public policy, is really critical. What the community sector brings is innovation, insight, and reach. There's incredible programs that have been developed at a community level, and they are producing incredible results, but there is a real limit to that. Part of it is the funding gap that Adam talked about, but there is a limitation that's inherent to the scale of what we're able to do that we really need to acknowledge. And so we produce these amazing boutique programs, we see people's lives transformed, but we can only reach a small fraction of the people that could actually benefit from those programs. And so our efforts on our own will never move the needle in terms of some of the larger statistics that have been shared by both Liz and Gary. And so what that does is it creates an imperative for us to partner and to embed our learnings within larger scale service delivery systems. And so that's why we were very interested in what the healthcare sector has to offer, as well as other service delivery systems. The other piece that we have to bring to the table is insight. And I was fascinated by the statistics that Liz shared. And as Liz pointed out, it poses more questions than answers. And in order to get at those answers, we'll need to be part of doing research. And we have a role to play in terms of helping formulate the questions around the why. We also have a role to play in terms of providing the reach into communities that are underserved, and often communities that are actually not even reflected in those statistics. I was just chatting with Jen over the break about a potential research project that I'm very excited about. And we were talking about, well, how do we reach the folks that are off the grid? They're actually not reflected, they're not counted, they're not part of those major data sets that we look at when we're analyzing what's happening around financial well-being in our country. And immediately I was thinking about the organizations that are represented here from Manitoba, but I'm sure that story is reflected all across this country, who actually have reach into those communities, who both have some knowledge that they've gleaned from working with those communities, but can be part of helping to both inform research studies as well as provide access to participants that are not part of the picture right now and not really considered in terms of social policy. And then finally, I think there's some really exciting work that can be done in terms of partnerships between community-based organizations and larger scale service delivery systems. And we're on the cusp of one in Winnipeg that was inspired in part by Gary's work on prescribing tax returns. And doctors in Manitoba have developed a poverty tool that provides doctors with the ability to connect people to community resources around being able to file for tax returns, get access to some of the benefits that they're entitled to but aren't getting. A key issue with that is, so we were excited about this tool, very excited, and we thought this is something that's really needed, but the organizations that are doing this kind of work on the ground are already overwhelmed with demand, and particularly with the individuals that are very much in the margins and really need a lot of intensive individualized supports to actually navigate those systems. A 1-800 number isn't going to do it. They actually need somebody walking alongside them, building their capacity, their skills, their confidence to be able to access the benefits that they're entitled to. And so what that means is that we need to be working hand in hand to try and figure out how within healthcare systems, within social service agencies, within some of these larger scale systems that essentially touch the lives of every single person that's living in poverty. How do we embed some of the knowledge and some of the innovative programming that we've developed within our community agencies? How do we embed that within those systems so that we can get at the reach that we need to in order to actually move the dial on some of those statistics that we were looking at?
Thank you very much. That was really interesting. I want to hear more about how you prescribe a tax return. Now that you've talked about what you do and some of the partnerships and the work that you're doing, can each of you talk a little bit about what you think is the biggest single challenge to moving forward with the work? What's holding you back? Who wants to start?
Okay, I'll see what I can do here. I would say for researchers here in Canada, we face an enormous challenge in terms of data. Ray, I was looking at your charts and your heat maps and things, drooling, because it's just, it's the kind of stuff that we would love to be able to do here. And we just don't necessarily have the kinds of data sets to do that. Another thing I think that is a bit of a challenge for us is that notwithstanding all of those big data sets, right, administrative tax return data and national surveys and things like that, which are so important and really, really meaningful in terms of getting a handle on what is the problem to be fixed, what is happening, what is changing, right? There's also a need for really, really fine-grain information, and that's the kind of like tacit knowledge and expertise that a lot of you in this room have. And trying to figure out ways that we can better harness that, better do a better job of gathering it together, and then actually communicating it back up to policymakers. If it's okay, I'm going to tell you a really, really fast story about the time that I was in the federal budget lockup. And this is when they lock you in a room and they give you an advance copy of the federal budget and they say you can go read it, but you can't talk to anyone about it. And then they put officials in another room and you can go and talk to the officials. And I asked an official a question because I noticed in the budget they said, hey, there's this really weird thing. We have this working income tax benefit, which is seen by a lot of folks as like this could be possibly the best way to actually help people who are working age get out of poverty. All right, it's a benefit that has a lot of potential to it, and the federal government was trying to figure out why isn't everybody that they think is eligible using it. So the finance officials were saying, by their estimates, about 10 to 12% of the eligible population is not using this benefit, and they were genuinely unclear about why. They literally don't know, and so we've got this divide. On the one hand, we've got these officials who have access to great big data sets, but they don't understand the why, right? They don't understand the human stories around that 10 to 12% that aren't using the program. And you guys understand an awful lot of those stories, and so we need to do a better job of linking up that big data and the local individual stories.
Change up the order.
Okay. So one of the biggest things that's holding us back in terms of some of the broader work that I talked about is having that work resourced. So we all know that work at a programmatic level is under-resourced, and we're not able to reach all of the people that could potentially benefit from our from the programs and services that we offer. But there's an even bigger funding gap around being able to do some of that broader systemic institutional work. So in terms of being able to inform what financial institutions are doing in order to be able to do and engage in a consistent way around policy work, in order to be part of the ABLE collaborative and be part of working together to create a body of knowledge and joint policy positions around the pieces that we want to move forward. All of that work, by and large, is being done off the side of people's desks, and we're not being funded to do that work directly. We're not reporting to any funder around that work, and we're just doing it because there's an imperative to do it. And I think that work needs to be better resourced so that it can be done more consistently. So I think there's a need for backbone organizations that oversee that kind of work, both nationally and regionally, and that work needs to be recognized as important, and it needs to be well resourced. So I think that that's probably one of the biggest challenges. We recently had a exchange with Momentum. Some of their staff came over to see it, and it was incredible, like in terms of hearing about how the kind of traction that they've gotten in Calgary, and trying to get some insight into how did you achieve so much in such a little amount of time between now and the last ABLE. And the shoe kind of dropped. It was on the very last day of our exchange where we discovered that they had a staff position that was dedicated to policy and research. And immediately we were green with envy, but it also speaks to the importance of having those kinds of resources invested in a consistent way.
How about in the U.S.?
Not surprisingly, I think our challenges are a little different in the U.S. Probably first and foremost political. You're probably very familiar with our very dysfunctional political system right now, and contorted, long-winded political campaign which nobody can figure out. But I think I think the last 10 years have been particularly robust, Jennifer, in generating data and insights about what works, what doesn't. But we don't have the political will or supposedly the resources to carry them forward. Another challenge is the integration challenge that Gary and Louise talked about. We know we need to do that. We're not anywhere near where we need to be. We need you guys to come to the U.S. to explain that to us. And I think the other big issue in the U.S., which I don't think is as much of an issue here, is race. I happen to live very close to Ferguson and have been very involved in those efforts. And we've despite educational gains, civil gains, voting gains, our wealth inequality numbers just don't move. And racial injustice is a huge, troubling issue for us in the U.S.
I think I'll just add briefly, I guess, two quick pieces. One, I like to think of sort of more of an internal thing. It's not really internal. I guess what I see amongst the health provider community and especially amongst doctors, where we have to sort of, which I think is then reflected more broadly, is the challenges of getting people who are in the top 1% or 5% of income earners to really care, right? And to really sort of look outside of that bubble. I started off by saying that I think health providers have a way through that, which I think is partly true. But the fact that many resist that it can be very disheartening to me. And so I think there's a real challenge of trying to push through that. The other piece, which is much bigger, I think, is still sort of just looking at the big level policy environment, the political environment we live in, which is still so grounded in the idea of austerity and unwillingness to really kind of to move back towards being able to fund true progressive social programs. The fact that even what was apparently the most progressive political party in Canada campaigned on the idea of a balanced budget was one of the most disheartening pieces of political movement that I've seen in a very long time, I gotta say, and which actually left the party that did get into government looking very progressive, maybe more progressive than it deserved to be, only because it sat, slightly to the left of where that apparently progressive party sat. I'm trying to be nonpartisan, but I would say I am partisan. I don't know what partisan, I'm nothing partisan these days. But I think we still sit in a very, very troubling policy environment because of that.
Okay, now it's time to open it up to the audience. We have 2 mics. Please ask questions. Try to keep them brief because we want to get lots of answers, and we'll do that for 10 or 15 minutes.
Hi, my name is Thomas Alia. Excuse me, I've got a little bit of laryngitis. I am a college professor, and I've been listening to the discussions all morning, and I applaud the work that everybody does, and here we're involved in it as well. But I think when you've been talking about leveraging different systems and leveraging different things, none of what I heard actually leveraged education, specifically primary education. There was a movement 20 years ago to remove things like civics classes and all sorts of things from our school systems, but it also is one of the most homogeneous areas that we actually do have on a very flat, level playing field. My question would be to the people in this room and to you folks up there, where would the advocacy come, or how can you advocate to get a lot of these programs put back into the elementary school system so that as they rise through, that lesson continues to be learned and learned and learned? Because by the time we see them sometimes at post-secondary education, the damage is far too extent. We see kids relying on food banks, and they don't know how to spend their government money for OSAP or whatever the case may be. So all of these things, financial literacy, food literacy, those things should be embedded in the thing in schools, and I'm wondering what you think about that.
The point you raise is an excellent one, and it's one that comes up quite frequently in terms of financial literacy and embedding it in a more substantial way within the school system. We are doing a little bit of that work in Winnipeg, but I think there's potential to do a lot more. And the work that we've done is focused primarily on schools that have served the Aboriginal community. And so one of the ways is in partnership with the Boys and Girls Club to provide, and this is again working in partnership with the schools, to provide access to the Canada Learning Bond for students that participate in a summer learning enrichment program and receive bursaries. And so we work with the schools and with the Boys and Girls Club to provide parents with the opportunity to invest the bursaries that are earned in an RESP and gain access to the Canada Learning Bond as a consequence. We also had a project a number of years ago with the Aboriginal Seniors Resource Centre, which is just down the street from SEED, where they invited us to do some financial literacy programming. And part of what they told us when we were doing the evaluation at the end is they really wanted to connect with youth. And they felt that there was a broken link because of colonialism, because of the residential schools between Aboriginal seniors, elders, and youth, and they wanted to be part of reconnecting. And so when we got a request from Children of the Earth School, which is just next door to us, to do some financial literacy there, we connected the two, and what has grown out of that is our Money Stories program, which involves delivering money management training within the schools, and within after-school programs and a whole range of community-based organizations with Aboriginal seniors and elders sharing their stories. We are also training junior facilitators who are also able to do peer training along with the elders, and so it's an intergenerational program, and have recently started an arm of that program, which is working with adults, and we had a couple of people from one of the schools that again serves the Aboriginal community that attended the adult facilitation component of the work that we're doing. And so a key piece is to embed that capacity within the schools, and the challenge is how do we scale up a model like this that grew organically out of requests from the community, out of our evaluation, to be able to have broader reach.
You want to talk?
I feel like I'm going to be the Debbie Downer who, hearing about these great projects that are happening in Winnipeg and then sort of saying, okay, so if we're going to go to scale, here are a couple of other challenges that I think we need to be aware of. And I say this as well as a university professor who can totally tell exactly when the OSAP checks have come in, because that's when the line at the Tim Hortons gets longer and shorter and, it's totally visible. So I guess a couple of things. Number one, there actually has been some effort and some movement in the vast majority of provinces in this country to put financial education in the school curriculum, in the public school curriculum. That includes here in Ontario, in Quebec, and in BC, where they were kind of the leaders on this. And I know the FCAC has been doing a lot of work to try and create resources to support teachers, because we know that one of the big challenges in the public school system is that teachers themselves don't necessarily feel equipped and expert enough to be able to deliver this kind of information and these kinds of resources.
Do you think there's enough at the lower grades, though? It tends to start at grade 4, doesn't it?
I'm going to say no, because a lot of the placeholders in the curriculum, we wait until kids are around in grade 10, and it's focused on post-secondary education decision-making, and by that point, it's too late. It's too late. I mean, not only just for like sort of financial education purposes, but also for purposes around making choices around PSE. Do you go or not, and how do you finance that? Kids don't wait until grade 10 to make those choices. It's happening way earlier. Another challenge is that we know from a lot of the evidence on this stuff that the bigger impacts for kids, it's less about what they get sort of schooled up in the classroom, and it's what they do at home, right? And it's the models that they see with the parents. So whatever interventions we're thinking of in terms of an education-based focus, we've got to figure out ways to be able to connect to the home environment and to parents and to the broader community as well.
Okay. Okay. Any more questions? Yes.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody, especially for the training that we had this morning. And my question is just a follow-up for the question that we've had. Am I loud enough?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, about teaching the children. For me, I'm going even to add that how about, or are we doing the teaching of adults about basic financial literacy? And not only the people who are poor or who are vulnerable, but the people or the staff agencies that are dealing with poor people, are they trained so that they can train the people who are very poor in order to overcome the problems? And this is because I have seen how it works. And the question, another question I have is, what is Canada? Is Canada not the first world country? Why are we having very, very poor people here in the first world country? This morning, as I arrived at the train, the Union, I was told, take a taxi to go where you're going. And I said, I can walk there because I have 2 hours. They said, no, 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 you will take 45 minutes. I said, it's okay, I will walk. As I get out, I counted 6 people sleeping on the street. Then I asked myself, am I in Canada? So what we need to do, is it possible for everybody here in Canada to be trained? Because if you remember in 2008, when the late financial literacy minister appointed the group to go around Canada to do the research, they found that only 51% of Canadians do the saving, 41 don't. But more research done, it was found that 75% of Canadians do struggle on how to handle money. I'm hoping that this training that we have, this workshop we are having today, is going to help when we reach out to do the training. If I had time, I'll talk more. So we'll leave it there.
Certainly, I've done my share of financial education through workshops, and it's hard sometimes to get people to attend. You know, there's some guilt, there's some intimidation, there's fear that they'll have to share information they don't want to share. It might be better off in a one-on-one kind of thing, but again, who's going to pay for that, for the time that it takes? So there's a lot of challenges reaching adults. I like the idea of interactive programs of some kind, but again, you need the right kind of way to deliver them. So it's still a struggle. Any thoughts?
Yeah, a couple things. I mean, I'll say, first of all, when we started our income security health promotion program, we kind of had 3 I guess, pillars to the work we were doing. These may seem fairly obvious to you, but increase access or increase income through various ways, including access to benefits, reducing debt, and then financial literacy training. And I thought that we would have, maybe 5% of people might be interested in the financial literacy piece. I didn't even really know what it meant when we started into it, but looking back at our stats from the first year, around 60% of people who came through the program were interested in some form of financial literacy training or education. I don't know if training is the right word, but sort of work on improving financial literacy, which is actually amazing. And I think heartening when it comes to the kind of comments that you just had. People really want this stuff. People get that this is important. People get that, in these types of, when they're living with difficult economic circumstances, people seem to be desperate to learn how to manage that better. So I think there is real potential there. In terms of the smaller question on why there is poverty in Canada, there shouldn't be, I think is sort of the bottom line. I will say one thing, though, on that front. And this is something that, again, one of the challenges that I think we face in doing this work is that, again, as all of you know, the causes of poverty come from so many different angles, right? I mean, they're so multifactorial. And we are constantly faced with the challenge of how to kind of cross over the boundaries between these sectors. We see it most obviously in government, where you have to, like our Poverty Reduction Committee in Ontario has like 6 different ministries sitting on it, et cetera, but there still doesn't seem to be a clear path towards true intersectoral collaboration on these types of issues. I think it's obviously what we need. I mean, in the health world, we talk about health in all policies as one way to sort of start bridging sectors to make sure that everyone is looking at the health impacts of what they're putting through. It's probably just one framework to work from, but maybe that would help us start to truly understand what is causing poverty here and truly understand how we can move beyond it.
Okay. We have time for one more question, and then we have to wrap it up, so go ahead.
Thank you. It's not so much a question as a comment, and maybe to engage you in some comment about it as well. All of you have been doing great work, as everybody here in this auditorium here. One thing that kept resonating with me was the amount of times you mentioned the word work and working, but it was always related to what you're doing and your programs. And no offense, because it's needed, but I think the biggest thing here is that to reduce poverty, we got to get people who are underemployed working. So the word, thank you. And and in relation to what you just said, in your epitaph, in what the panel discussion was going to be, there's a mention about business, but business isn't represented on this panel right now.
It's coming in future sessions.
Thank you. And I think that that's a huge piece here, talking about bridging the gap, is social responsibility from our corporate capitalistic environment that we all live and need to strive in. And I think that's a huge piece that's missing. And sometimes I think we all get caught up in creating work for ourselves and with that in our own programs, but I think the focus needs to be directed on creating work for others. The City of Toronto is doing a great job of that and is doing better and better strides in that. I work with that organization, and we're doing better and better things, but I'd like to see that more from community-based agencies reaching out to their local labor markets. Thank you.
I want to say that those are not mutually exclusive. We see many people who are fully employed who are not doing a good job of saving money, so it has to be taught to everybody, but it would be nice, yes, to see more emphasis on helping people with careers. I think there are quite a number of programs. Do you want to talk about that? Anybody?
Yeah, we only had 5 minutes each. I'd have loved to have talked about sort of the full range of what SEED and what the CED sector is involved with. The whole issue of quality jobs is really critical, and also doing it in a way that I think poses a challenge to the business community as well. So one of the strategies that our organization utilizes is to build worker-owned cooperatives and social enterprises that can be exemplary in terms of providing quality jobs in sectors such as, for example, the food industry, where we provide wages that are higher than industry averages, benefits as well, and a pathway in terms of career advancement. And as someone that came to Canada as a newcomer, many newcomers get stuck in survival jobs, even though they have incredible skills that they can bring into our country. And so being able to create those pathways within those enterprises is important, or else being able to create pathways that allow them to be able to enter into their fields that they were trained to do. So we also have a program called Recognition Counts that has been replicated across the country. So we're one of a number of different partner organizations where newcomers can access loans of up to $10,000 to be able to re-enter into fields like engineering, dentistry, places where we need those skills. So to be able to write the exams, to be able to take the time to maybe do some additional training so that they can go back into those particular fields. So we can have doctors up north where they're really needed in Indigenous communities. And so it's a win-win-win. And financial literacy, financial education is a really important part of that. It's part of the financial empowerment framework because it's providing people with accessible access to loans that'll allow them to move their lives forward. So that program, more than any other, moves people from a situation of poverty to prosperity within a very short period of time. And a number of our graduates are earning a heck of a lot more than I am, which makes me very happy.
Okay, we have talked a lot about the state of empowerment, and some of it somewhat pessimistic. So to help you go to lunch in a good mood, we thought we'd talk to everybody a short vision statement of how they think their ideal financial empowerment strategy with low-income Canadians would work.
Yikes. Okay. Visionary before lunch too. Okay, here's what I can do. Okay, so for me, I think the goal here is all about creating a context so that in Canada, everybody has an opportunity for financial inclusion and empowerment regardless of their income and wealth. And as I said, I think about this as a pointy-headed researcher and as somebody who looks at public policy questions a little bit, kind of 10,000 feet up. And so maybe I'm going to do this more as a bit of a challenge to the floor, a challenge to this room. I think, number one, we have to not lose the threads of some of the pieces on the policy agenda that are left hanging. I've already talked briefly about the Whitby. There's a new financial consumer code that was in development, and so we're going to need to, stay on that. We need to keep looking at that. We need to do a lot of work to be able to hold this new government to account in terms of the kinds of commitments that they've made. They've promised to increase the take-up of the Registered Education Savings Plan and the Canada Learning Bond, which Adam had mentioned. We're at, 38% take-up now, thereabouts? 30-ish % take-up. We can do more, and a lot of the folks in this room, how we can do more. You know it because this is the work that you do in your communities. So I guess my challenge to you is not only just, demand more of governments. If the Canada Child Benefit that is coming in is actually going to help the Government of Ontario to exceed its targets for poverty reduction and child poverty in Ontario, that's great. Okay, so what's next? Can we set even more, assertive targets then in terms of reducing child poverty in this province? Can we ask the provincial government to then reinvest in programs and services that will be beneficial to low-income kids? So, progress should really continue to drive us to demand better, because even though we're doing well and there are some signs of good progress that I think Liz outlined, better is always possible.
All right, 30 seconds. I'll say two things, which are kind of rehashing in some ways some things I've said, but I want to say them again. First of all, I think there is such huge potential in non-traditional sectors around becoming involved in this work on the front lines, around accessing or helping us to access everybody who needs support in achieving financial empowerment. And I think the will is there in many ways. I think the connections need to be made. And so I guess that is my challenge out to the room here, is making those connections. And then second of all, again, from the big level policy environment, we cannot do anything without adequately funding government to be able to carry out the programs they're talking about. We need to keep pushing that call for a stronger and proper progressive taxation system. I'll just say that we had a very short-lived but I think impactful campaign or a group called Doctors for Fair Taxation a few years ago here in Ontario, which the reason I think it had impact is because it was basically people from the top 1% or couple of percent saying tax us. Right, and I think that sentiment is out there more than we think. Again, it's something we need to tap into. We need to get people talking about this so that we can actually make things happen and make real change there.
So one of the biggest signs for hope for me has to do with demand that we are unable to meet. And so when we offer our Train the Trainer money management training program, we get quite a lot of interest from service providers that are at the front lines. And so these are both service providers within community-based organizations, as well as service providers within larger systems, such as the healthcare system, social service delivery systems, and so on. And what that tells me is that they're recognizing a gap in terms of their knowledge and in terms of their ability to be able to provide relevant and helpful financial information and coaching and support to people at a time when they can actually apply it. And so they're recognizing that need, which is why they're coming to our door. We're not yet at the point where we can meet that demand. But for me, that's really hopeful. And I think it answers a bit about the question around how do we go about integrating? Because I think there's a will on the side of frontline workers recognizing that. And we did a little bit of work with the settlement agency that works with every single refugee that comes into Winnipeg, where we did some training with their staff so that they'd be better equipped to work with folks. And so using that kind of a model, I think, holds a lot of promise. I'd really like to reinforce the comments by both Gary and Jen around really holding politicians accountable in terms of following through on promises that have been made and moving the bar. And I think we should even move the bar in terms of our engagement around policy, so that it's not just a question of us lobbying, but it's more that we're at the table at the point of creating policy. So to be part of co-creating policy along with government. And I think there's really good models in terms of that being done effectively. And so I think that's part of what we should be asking for as well, so that the knowledge that we've gained can be applied in terms of creating policy. And then the last thing that I'd like to say is never to lose sight of this isn't an end in and of itself. It's part of a poverty reduction strategy and just part of it. And so ultimately, my vision in terms of an effective financial empowerment work that does its job would be that I can no longer work at Seed, which I love, but that I would be somewhere in a garden planting flowers and and earning a living in a greenhouse somewhere, because poverty no longer exists and I can do something else that I love.
I'm not sure I should have the last word here on what Canada should do, but I will say that I think, when most Americans look north, they worry about you guys being warm enough, not really about whether or not you have a poverty problem, which I think most Americans would be surprised to hear that there is a poverty problem. Americans see Canada as peaceful, sane, and prosperous. And in fact, I think we always think, gosh, there's so much we can learn from Canada. And so I guess my hope would be that perhaps this is an area where, we have some things to share. But my bigger hope is that we can, strengthen these kinds of collaborations and partnerships, whether it's in the nonprofit or the government sector, so that we can all learn together and move forward together.